A grey mist curls through the hollow, the kind that clings to your clothes and memory. The dirt road winds past rusted mailboxes and sagging porches, each one leaning a little farther than the last. This is Odd, West Virginia, or what's left of it. A place where the woods have reclaimed the houses, and the air smells like rain-soaked timber and old coal dust. Somewhere down this forgotten stretch of Appalachia stands the Whittaker home, a patchwork shack stitched together from wood, tin, and time. You might remember it from the last time we were here when we met the Whittaker family, known by many as America's most inbred family. But tonight, we return not just to the legend, but to the man who became its quiet center, Ray Whittaker. Ray doesn't speak much. When he does, it's in a language few understand: grunts, gestures, the kind of primal communication that says more than words ever could. His eyes, pale and distant, carry decades of silence. Yet behind them lies a tenderness, a spark of something human, gentle and lost. This hollow wasn't always like this. Once, children played by the creek. Church bells echoed through the trees. But as the mines closed and the world moved on, the people here were left behind. The Whittakers stayed generation after generation, marrying within, surviving off the land, and building a life in isolation so deep it became its own world. Neighbors whispered, outsiders stared, but inside those walls, the Whittakers simply lived, bound by blood, poverty, and a loyalty that blurred the line between family and fate. It wasn't sin or malice that shaped them. It was neglect, shame, and the slow decay of a place forgotten by progress. Tonight, we walk that dirt path again, past the barking dogs and broken fences, to uncover not just the strangeness, but the sorrow that built it. To understand how one man, Ray Whittaker, became both a symbol of curiosity and a living echo of generational trauma that still haunts the Appalachian hills. Because in places like this, blood remembers what the world forgets. Where are you watching from tonight? The cities, the small towns, or maybe somewhere that feels just as forgotten? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Underbelly Bloodline, because what's buried in these hills deserves to be seen. The year was 1947, deep in the coal-shadowed hills of West Virginia, when the mines still breathed smoke, and men carried dust in their lungs like a second heartbeat. Down in those hollows, where daylight died early and the mountains whispered secrets, a man named Ray Whittaker Sr. built his home from scraps and stubbornness. He wasn't a bad man, not by the standards of the hollow, just a quiet one, the kind who worked long days and came home to silence. Folks said he was born in these hills and never once thought of leaving. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe the blood in his veins already belonged to the land. The Whittaker name had been carved into these ridges for generations. Cousins married cousins, not out of sin, but out of distance, because the nearest town was 10 miles of mud and mountains away. The boundary between kin and companion blurred over time, until the family tree folded in on itself. It wasn't about choice, it was about survival. But inside that house, love was complicated. Affection came in quiet gestures, a bowl of beans on the table, a hand on a shoulder. Behind those small acts lingered tension, secrets, and the unspoken knowledge that something about their bloodline wasn't like the others. By the 1950s, stories began to circle through the neighboring towns. Children born with strange mannerisms, a family who rarely left their property, a man, Ray's brother, rumored to have vanished after a feud over land and blood. But in the hollow, people didn't call the law. They buried what they couldn't fix. And so, the Whittakers endured, building lives from the ruins of isolation. The walls of their home soaked up laughter, fights, prayers, and screams, until even the house seemed to breathe with their history. Generation after generation, the pattern repeated. Poverty, pride, pain, like a curse sewn into the very soil. Tonight, as we trace Ray Sr.'s footsteps through the fog and the fields, we're not chasing monsters. We're searching for the moment when love became lineage and lineage became legend. Because sometimes the line between right and wrong isn't drawn in ink, it's drawn in blood. Tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Somewhere the past still lingers. Somewhere folks still whisper names long buried. Let me know in the comments below, and if this story grips you, subscribe to Underbelly Bloodline, where we uncover the families time tried to forget. Morning light creeps over the ridge like a secret it doesn't want to tell. The air hums with cicadas, and the dirt road that leads out of the Whittaker hollow disappears into a fog that never quite lifts. For most families, that road meant freedom away to reach town, school, or church. But for the Whittakers, it was the edge of the known world. Beyond that ridge lay the town of Beckley, a place with storefront windows, paved streets, and people who spoke of the hollow in hushed tones. Outsiders called it strange, backward, inbred, but the truth was simpler and sadder. The Whittakers weren't born monsters, they were born forgotten. Ray Whittaker, still a boy then, watched the world from the tree line. He'd see cars drive past once or twice a week, headlights cutting through the fog like ghosts. He wondered what kind of people could leave this place and not look back. But no one in his family ever did. Leaving meant breaking from blood, and in the Whittaker world, blood was everything. When the county school sent a man to check on the children, he never came back. Not because of violence, but because of fear. The hollow had a way of swallowing outsiders. Dogs barked, voices shouted from unseen windows, and the land itself seemed to warn, go home. That was the Whittaker boundary, invisible yet absolute. By the late 60s, rumors of the family spread through every gas station and bar in Boone County. Tales of cousins marrying cousins, of children born with wild eyes and quiet minds. Some said the Whittakers carried an ancient curse. Others said it was just poverty, left too long to rot. But inside the hollow, the truth was far more complex. A tangle of love, loyalty, and shame that no one dared untie. And as the world beyond the ridge moved on television, highways, modern life, the Whittakers stayed rooted like the oaks around their home. Each generation inherited not just their blood, but their burden. The hollow became their universe, sealed by silence and fear, watched only by the hills. Tonight, we step past that invisible line into the place where the world forgot to look. Because to understand the Whittakers, you have to see what happens when a family becomes its own world, and the world stops coming back. Night falls early in the hollow. The sun slips behind the ridge before supper, and by the time the lamps flicker on, the woods are already whispering. Inside the Whittaker home, silence is not the absence of sound, it's a presence. A living thing that moves between the rooms, heavy as smoke, patient as memory. The house itself seems to breathe. Every creak in the floorboards, every rusted nail in the walls, carries the weight of generations. The Whittakers don't speak much. Words, when they come, are mumbled, broken, or swallowed. But the silence says everything. It tells of love that's worn thin, of tempers flaring behind closed doors, of things that happened long ago and were never spoken again. Ray Whittaker grew up inside that hush, the kind of quiet that teaches a child to listen for moods, not words, to read danger in a glance, to know when to stay out of sight. Poverty did more than take from them. It shaped their language, their posture, their sense of what's normal. Isolation became inheritance. But there were nights when the quiet broke. A shout, a slammed door, a sudden storm of emotion that came and went like lightning. Neighbors whispered about feuds that never ended, about cousins fighting over land and bloodlines. And sometimes, a child would disappear for a few days, sent to help kin across the ridge, and no one asked questions when they came back different, quieter. Inside the Whittaker house, there was no crime to report, no police to call. Only cycles too old to trace. Abuse mixed with affection, loyalty with fear. The walls soaked it in, holding the echoes of every generation that passed through. It's the kind of silence that can drive a person mad, not with noise, but with memory. Ray, now older, would sit on the porch at dusk, rocking in that same silence. He never spoke of the things he saw or felt growing up. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe no one ever asked. But his eyes, those pale, distant eyes, carry the story. A story of survival in a house that kept its own secrets, long after the world stopped coming by. If these walls could talk, what do you think they'd say? Have you ever been in a house where silence felt heavier than sound? Pity. And Ray, standing on that porch, would become the face of a story that wasn't his to tell, yet one he'd never escape. Sometimes, the true crime isn't what happens inside a house, but what happens when the outside world finally looks in. There's something about Ray Whittaker's eyes, pale, distant, yet startlingly alive. They don't just look at you, They look through you, like he's peering past the moment into something older, something buried. Those who've met him say, it's hard to forget that gaze. It's not madness, it's memory, the kind that's lived too long in silence. The camera first caught Ray sitting on his porch, rocking in a half-broken chair, the dogs barking around him like guardians of another age. Behind him, the hills stretched endlessly green, ghostly, eternal. In that moment, time seemed to fold. Here was a man untouched by the modern world, shaped instead by the echoes of generations that never left the ridge. When you look into Ray's eyes, you see the inheritance of the hollow, the poverty, the inbreeding, the neglect that shaped his bloodline. But you also see something deeper, something tragically human, a gentleness that the world mistook for strangeness, an innocence born not from ignorance but from isolation. They called him the most inbred man in America. But those words thrown around on headlines and forums stripped away the truth. Ray didn't choose this life. He was born into it. Into the silence, the trauma, the endless cycles of family feuds and generational sorrow. He became a living artifact of a place America would rather not see proof of what happens when an entire region is left to rot in its own history. The world stared at him through screens, fascinated and horrified all at once. They studied his mannerisms, dissected his face, debated his mind, never realizing that Ray was the mirror, the reflection of neglect, poverty, and the quiet cruelty of forgetting. When the camera lingered too long, his eyes turned away, not out of shame, but instinct, like an animal who knows the forest better than the flash. And in that glance, there's a truth no documentary can script. Ray Whittaker is not a TN monster. He's a memory, the living ghost of a family that time abandoned and the world exploited. It began quietly, just a few photographs, a single video, and a whisper passed through the digital veins of the internet. Then, like wildfire on dry Appalachian grass, the Whittaker name spread across the world. Headlines called them the most inbred family in America. Their faces, solemn, bewildered, haunting, were shared by millions who had never set foot in West Virginia, but suddenly thought they understood it. For decades, the Hollow had kept its secrets. Now, the world came knocking with cameras, questions, and judgment dressed as curiosity. The Whittaker's porch, once a place of quiet routine and family, became a stage for the world's fascination with the grotesque. Ray, the silent man with the pale eyes, was no longer just a son of the hills. He was an image, a symbol, a headline. They came from everywhere, journalists, YouTubers, documentarians, each one saying they wanted to tell the truth. But truth is fragile here. In Appalachia, every story carries pain under its skin. The cameras captured the dirt floors, the barking dogs, the confusion in Ray's eyes, but they missed what couldn't be seen, the decades of neglect, the loss of dignity, the weight of being turned into spectacle. For every dollar made off their image, the Whittakers stayed poor. For every comment online calling them monsters, there was a quieter one asking, who failed them? Because what happened here wasn't a sideshow, it was a symptom. Generational poverty, mental illness, isolation, all ignored until it became too strange to look away from. The media didn't create the tragedy, they just broadcasted it. But in doing so, they transformed a family into folklore, and folklore has no mercy. The Hollow became myth, the people became cautionary tales, and Ray became both victim and ghost in his own lifetime. Some say the attention helped, that it brought aid, food, and awareness. Others say it only deepened the wound, exposing generations of trauma for the world's consumption. Either way, the damage was done. The Hollow was no longer silent. Its story had been sold. If the world turned its lens on your family, your flaws, your bloodline, your past, would you want to be seen? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're drawn to the hidden stories beneath America's skin, subscribe to Underbelly Bloodline, where we uncover the truths that fame can't fix and the silence that no camera can capture. There's a part of the Hollow the sun never seems to reach, a slope behind the Whittaker home, where the ground sinks soft and the trees lean like old men keeping watch. Locals say that's where the families buried their dead for generations. No headstones, no markers, just the earth, remembering what the world forgot. In those hills, history doesn't rest, it lingers. Every root, every creek, every breath of wind carries a name that once belonged to a Whittaker. Some went mad, some disappeared, others lived quiet and died younger than they should have. But their stories never left the ridge. They stayed behind, whispering through the soil. The Whittaker bloodline didn't begin in sin. It began in solitude. Generations of cousins, born too close to the same name, too far from the rest of the world. Inbreeding wasn't the cause, it was the symptom. The symptom of a place where hope couldn't reach and poverty became tradition. Over time, the blood grew thick and the walls around them thicker. Old records tell of a family feud that split the Whittakers decades ago, brothers fighting over a patch of mountain that wasn't worth a dime. Some say that feud ended in blood. Others say it never ended at all. The descendants carried that bitterness in their bones, passing it down like inheritance. Abuse became habit, and silence became law. Every ghost in that lineage has a name, even if no one speaks it anymore. A mother who vanished into the woods one night after her youngest was born. A boy who drowned in the creek during a summer storm. A man who went to prison after a feud turned to murder. Each life, another thread in a tapestry of sorrow woven tight, so no one could pull it apart. When outsiders talk about the Whittakers, they talk about deformity and inbreeding, but the real story is much darker. It's the story of abandonment. A family left to survive in a place with no light, no help, and no way out. The ghosts of their past aren't haunting them, they are them. The trauma didn't die, it grew roots. Do you believe a place can hold the memory of everything that's happened there? That a family's pain can live on in the land itself? Morning comes slow to the Whittaker Hollow. The mist still clings to the hills, and the sound of dogs carries through the valley like it always has. But something feels different now, lighter, somehow. The same land that once held so much sorrow seems to breathe again. It's as if, after generations of silence, the hollow is learning how to speak. When the world first turned its lens on the Whittakers, it did so out of shocked curiosity born from cruelty. But over time, that noise faded, and what remained was something quieter, something almost tender. Strangers from across the country began sending food, clothes, and money. Volunteers came down the ridge to repair the roof, mend the fence, and bring supplies. For the first time in living memory, kindness reached the hollow. Ray sat on his porch as they worked, watching, rocking, smiling in his quiet way. The world that once laughed at him was now trying, in its own clumsy manner, to help him. And though he couldn't say the words, his eyes said enough. Gratitude, confusion, maybe even peace. But redemption isn't always clean. The past still lingers in every shadow, in every broken board of that house. The abuse, the trauma, the feuds, they don't vanish. They fade, slowly, like the fog burning off after a long Appalachian dawn. The scars remain, both in blood and memory. Yet, for the first time, there's hope that the cycle might end here with Ray, the last keeper of the hollow's history. Neighbors say they've seen him wave to passing cars now. A small thing, but powerful in a place that once trusted no one. The dogs still bark, the wind still hums through the trees, but the silence that ruled the Whittaker home for so long finally feels softer. Maybe that's what redemption looks like here, not forgiveness, not fame, but survival. Because in these mountains, surviving is the miracle. What does redemption look like where you're from? Does it come easy, or does it have to fight its way through history like it does here? There's a saying in these mountains, the past don't die, it just changes its name. And as the fog rolls over the hollow for one last time, that truth settles heavy over the Whittaker home. The walls still stand, though time has bitten through their bones. The porch creaks under the same weight it has carried for generations, the weight of blood, silence, and memory. Ray Whittaker sits there now, older, quieter, but somehow more seen than ever before. Cameras came and went. The world stared, judged, pitied, and moved on. Yet Ray remained, a living monument to what happens when the world forgets its people. What was once mocked as America's most inbred family has become something else entirely, a mirror, a reflection of what isolation, poverty, and neglect can do to the human spirit. In his eyes, those distant, searching eyes, you can still see the history of his bloodline, the whispers of kin who never left these hills, the echoes of laughter that turned to shouts, of feuds that outlived their reasons, of sins that pass down like heirlooms. And yet, there's something else there too. A glimmer. The kind that flickers in the dark but refuses to go out. Because the Whittakers are not just a tragedy, they're a truth. A truth about America's forgotten corners, about families buried alive in shame and misunderstanding. Their story forces us to look into the mirror and ask, what happens when compassion dies and curiosity replaces care? When bloodlines become cages and generations inherit silence instead of salvation? The hollow remains quiet now. The world has moved on to the next headline, the next horror. But for those who listen closely, the wind through these ridges still carries their story. One of survival, consequence, and the haunting cost of being unseen. So tell me, when you look into the mirror, what do you see? Are there stories in your blood that never made it past the front porch light? Drop a comment below, and if you followed this journey through the Whittaker Hollow, make sure to subscribe to Underbelly Bloodline, because this isn't just about them, it's about all of us and the shadows we inherit.